Sit quietly, son, while the flames of the fire dance. Let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, the future of England was shrouded in dark shadows. Catholic forces sought every opportunity to overthrow Queen Elizabeth, conspiring at home and abroad. Enemies hid not only on the battlefield but also in the secret corners of palaces, between the lines of letters and in whispers. And it was at just such times that a man emerged from the shadows. Francis Walsingham. He went down in history as neither a king nor a commander. His weapon was not the sword, but intelligence. His enemies were not fought on the battlefield, but in a world of secret letters, coded messages, and spies of uncertain loyalty. Walsingham became the eyes and ears of Queen Elizabeth, uncovering insidious plots and changing the fate of England. But how could one man protect an empire by walking in his own shadow? What games were played? What betrayals foiled? In this tale of espionage and intrigue, we take a close look at the creation of Britain's first major intelligence network and the man who built it and his struggle in the shadows. Are you ready? Then let's dive into the shadows. Ah, my son. Now I will take you through the mists of time to the turbulent world of the 16th century. It was a time when Europe was in flames, thrones were shaken, and faith was turned into a battlefield. Kings and queens fought not only with their armies, but also with words, beliefs, and insidious intrigues. And England, oh England, her fate was suspended in the midst of such a whirlwind. At that time, Europe was divided into Catholic and Protestant. The spiritual authority of Rome hung like a shadow over the Christian world. But as Martin Luther's teaching spread across the continent, the old order began to shake. The Reformation had become a force that threatened not only faith, but also thrones. France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire. All were united under the shield of Catholicism, but there was one place where old and new clashed, where tradition and rebellion were intertwined. England. England's break with the Catholic world began with King Henry VIII. In defiance of the Pope, he declared the Church of England independent and severed its ties with the Catholics. However, the unrest brought about by this break would last for generations. Protestantism gained strength under Henry's son, Edmund's son, Edward VI. But the Catholic Queen Mary Tudor, who succeeded him on the throne, carried out a bloody purge to return the country to its old faith. It was at this point, in 1558, that England once again reached a turning point in history with the accession of a new monarch, Queen Elizabeth I. The young Elizabeth inherited a throne in turmoil. The future of the country was uncertain, and enemies lurked around every corner. King Philip II of Spain, the Catholic powers in France, and even the Catholic nobility in England itself. All of them did not recognize Elizabeth as a legitimate monarch and were waiting for an opportunity to overthrow her. And one of the biggest threats was one of her own blood, Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, a Catholic queen supported by the Pope, who maintained her claim to the throne of England. Elizabeth's existence was not just a struggle for the power of a monarch, it was a great battle between faiths. If Elizabeth fell, Protestant England would fall with her. Was it possible for Elizabeth to stand alone in this chaos? Of course not. A queen's most powerful weapon is the loyal men who protect her. And that's where a name would appear on the stage of history: Francis Walsingham. He was not just an advisor, but a man who walked in the shadows, who could sense threats and stop his enemies before they made a move. He was the man to protect Elizabeth and England, but the price would be high. We are entering a story of espionage, betrayal, and bloodshed, son. Are you ready? Ah, my son, now I will take you back a little further through the mists of time. Great men are not born in a day, they are shaped by the hammer blow of time. That's the kind of man Francis Walsingham was. The journey that made him England's greatest spy master began in the years of a simple boy's education and faith. In 1532, Walsingham was born into a good family. His father, William Walsingham, was a wealthy and respected man. But fate was cruel. Little Francis lost his father when he was only 5 years old. Life would teach him to struggle at that age. His mother quickly remarried and Walsingham was sent to King's College School, which produced some of the brightest minds of the time. However, his real development was shaped by his legal education at Gray's Inn in Cambridge and the University of Padua. A place where the greatest thinkers of the time debated, where science and philosophy circulated freely. There he learned not only the law, but how people think and how they can be manipulated. Walsingham was not only a jurist, but also a man of deep faith. He was deeply committed to the Protestant cause. As he traveled around Europe, he observed how the Reformation movement spread and how the Catholic Church reacted. As the teachings of Luther and Calvin took root across the continent, the Catholic world waged a bloody war against this new wave of faith. Walsingham had already chosen his side in the midst of this war. England had to stand firm against the Catholics, and he was ready to do whatever it took. During the brutal Catholic rule of Mary Tudor, Walsingham's Protestant identity made it impossible for him to live in England. He sought refuge in France, where he came into contact with the reformers and learned during his years of exile how kings were overthrown by intrigue. When Mary died in 1558 and the Protestant Elizabeth ascended the throne, Walsingham was finally able to return home. But he was no longer just a jurist, but an experienced observer. He had seen the balances in Europe and understood how intrigues worked. This knowledge enabled him to rise rapidly through the ranks of the state. First as a member of Parliament, then he met the man who would pave the way to the Queen's favor, Sir William Cecil. But Cecil was Queen Elizabeth's most trusted advisor. He was clever, cunning, and most importantly, he knew that danger always lurked in the shadows. When he recognized the same keen eye and loyalty in Walsingham, he did not hesitate to draw him to his side. The two began to build an intelligence network to protect England against Catholic conspiracies. But Walsingham's talents could not be confined to the corridors of London. His eyes had to see into the darkest corners of Europe. In 1568, Walsingham was appointed ambassador to France. As he walked the streets of Paris, he was not only fulfilling his diplomatic mission, but also observing England's greatest enemies. In those days, France was in great turmoil. Bloody clashes were going on between Catholics and Protestants, and the Kingdom of France was trying to suppress this civil war. And it was during these years, in 1572, that one of the most horrible massacres in history took place, the St. Bartholomew's Night Massacre. Paris was drenched in Protestant blood. Walsingham saw this massacre himself. When he returned to England, he had not only horror in his eyes, but also a decision in his mind. If Elizabeth's enemies knew no mercy, she had to be ruthless. When he returned to England, he was no longer just an envoy, but one of Elizabeth's most trusted men. He was not just the Queen's diplomat, but the man who walked in the shadows. As Elizabeth's enemies plotted, Walsingham had to stay ahead of them. Traditional methods of protecting the Queen were not enough. Intelligence, secret codes, and spies had to come into play. And from that moment on, Francis Walsingham became embroiled in a shadow war that would go down in history. But this was only the beginning. You ready, son? Because from now on, the shadows will be even darker. Ah, boy. Are you ready to dive once more into the dark recesses of history? Because this is the story of words whispered in the shadows of thrones and invisible battles. When Queen Elizabeth took the throne, her enemies were not only beyond her borders. Treachery was rife within her own lands, and it was rooted in the sacred authority of Europe's most powerful kings and the Pope. In 1570, a decision from Rome changed the fate of England. Pope Pius V issued an edict and excommunicated Elizabeth. Do you know what this meant? Elizabeth was no longer just a monarch, but a heretic, a rebel in the eyes of the Christian world. The Pope made an appeal to all faithful Catholics. To dethrone Elizabeth is not only a duty, it is a prayer. So secret plots began to sprout all over England. hidden hands bent over the Queen, sharpening their daggers. France, Spain, even the Catholic nobility among her own people, all were waiting to see Elizabeth fall. Across the European continent, Elizabeth's enemies were uniting one by one. The greatest threat was King Felipe II of Spain. Ah, Felipe. He believed that God had chosen him to convert England to the Catholic faith. He was preparing his navy and planning a crusade against England. In France, the Catholic Guise family was forming secret alliances to overthrow Elizabeth. In Scotland, Mary Stuart, Mary Queen of Scots, coveted Elizabeth's throne. Her presence was a beacon of hope for Catholics inside England. When all these threats came together, Elizabeth's throne was hanging by a thread. And it was at this point that Francis Walsingham appeared on the scene. Walsingham was not just a statesman. He was a lord of shadows. There was only one way to protect Elizabeth. Information had to be obtained before the enemy. His eyes and ears had to be not only in London, but in every corner of Europe. So he began to build the most sophisticated intelligence network in British history. On the streets of London, in taverns, in churches, behind the walls of palaces. Walsingham's agents were everywhere. Even England's Catholic nobility could no longer trust their own servants. For Walsingham's network consisted not only of high-ranking spies, but also of simple peasants, merchants and priests, a tavern keeper carrying news, a servant whispering secrets, a monk betraying his own faith. His spies were sometimes seen alongside the enemy, sometimes unnoticed. But gathering intelligence was not enough. It had to be processed and made useful. Walsingham was not only an observer, but also a chess master. He meticulously analyzed the information his spies brought him, anticipating every move of the enemy. Thanks to him, countless conspiracies were thwarted before they began. Many an assassin's dagger was stopped before it found its target. Information was as dangerous as a sword. In the wrong hands, it could spell the end of a ruler. That's why Walsingham's art of espionage was not just about gathering information. It was also about decoding secret correspondence and intercepting enemy communication. At the time, kings, lords, and ambassadors used simple encryption methods for their communications. But for Walsingham, deciphering them was child's play. To intercept the correspondence of his enemies, he created a special team within himself. Code breakers. These men were capable of cracking even the most complex enemy ciphers. They would study a message for days, sometimes weeks, finding the key to the cipher in the smallest pun. But the real genius lay in Walsingham's system of double spies. His agents infiltrated his enemies, not only learning their plans, but also whispering misinformation into their ears. You think an assassin found out about Elizabeth's travel plans? Oh, poor man. That information had already been altered by Walsingham. Thinking he knew where the Queen would be, the assassin didn't even realize he was walking into a death trap. Messages, but not the kind you'd expect. Invisible letters, writing written with lemon juice, texts that appear when heated. Walsingham's agents were hiding truths you don't see on ordinary paper. In the margins of letters, in the seams, even on the pages of books. Some messages were written in secret ink and could only be read with certain chemicals. On the inside page of a Bible, innocently carried by a messenger, there were words that could change the fate of a ruler. That's it, son. The world always thinks wars are won with swords, but true victories are won with knowledge. Walsingham didn't have an army, but he had the most powerful weapon to protect a queen and a kingdom, the power of knowledge, and he was going to use that power to the fullest. Ah, my son, history is written with intrigue, betrayal, and the hard blows of fate. Here I will tell you how a queen's hopes slowly crumbled, and how intelligence and patience saved a throne. The story of Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, was not only the tragedy of a woman, but also a game of chess that decided the fate of a nation. And the master of that game was, once again, Francis Walsingham. Mary Stuart. Her very name cast a shadow over Elizabeth's throne. She was a beacon of hope for the Catholics of England. Elizabeth's legitimacy was disputed. Some thought she was a child out of wedlock and that Mary Stuart was the rightful heir to the throne. Moreover, Mary was the former Queen of France and had ties to powerful Catholic dynasties in Europe. If Elizabeth should one day fall, Catholics were ready to put Mary on the throne in her place. Mary's fate was storm-tossed from the start. When she ascended the throne of Scotland, she faced Protestant uprisings. One political intrigue after another left her in a difficult position. Finally, he lost his throne in his own country and sought refuge in England. Oh, what a mistake that was. Taking refuge with Elizabeth was actually walking into his own dungeon. Because Elizabeth never trusted her cousin Mary, she kept her under guard like a prisoner. But Mary's hopes were never dashed. Catholic conspirators waiting for Elizabeth to fall were plotting to free her and put her on the throne of England. And these plans would soon be on Walsingham's radar. Walsingham was a patient hunter. He could not accuse Mary Stuart outright because he needed hard evidence to convict her. So he decided to set a trap, and the name of that trap, the Babington Conspiracy. In 1586, Anthony Babington, a Catholic nobleman, started a secret correspondence with Mary Stuart. But there was something Babington didn't know. Walsingham had already intercepted his letters. His agents, who followed Mary's correspondence routes, first intercepted the letters, decrypted them, and then made sure they reached her. Mary was unwittingly signing her own death warrant. The secret messages were hidden in beer barrels and delivered to Mary. Mary wrote a letter to Babington suggesting that Elizabeth should be killed and that she should ascend to the throne. Oh, poor Mary! When she wrote that letter, her fate was already sealed. Walsingham read every word of that letter. From that moment on, there was no escape for Mary. Mary's letters were decoded by Walsingham's code breakers and presented to Elizabeth. Mary's treachery was now proven. It was impossible to defend her. She had made clear her intention to assassinate the Queen. For years, Elizabeth had refrained from executing Mary, but now there was no other option. Mary Stuart was put on trial at Fotheringhay Castle. She stood nobly before the court, denying the charges, but the letters were powerful evidence against her. Mary said that she was God's chosen ruler and that she would answer only to God. But neither those words nor her noble bearing could save her from her fate. The court sentenced her to death. On a cold February morning in 1587, Mary Stuart was brought before the hangman to be executed. She was dressed in a blood-red robe, for red was the color of martyrdom in the Catholic faith. She did not see herself as a queen, but as a martyr who had died for her faith. The executioner raised his sword, and the first blow did not quite cut her neck. Ah, an unfortunate end. The second blow was struck, and only with the third blow Mary's head was separated from her body. When they lifted her head, they realized that her hair had actually turned completely white. Years of captivity had slowly consumed her. Mary's death reverberated across Europe. Catholic kings saw the execution as a declaration of war. Only a year later, in 1588, King Felipe II of Spain began preparing the Spanish Armada to invade England. But fate was on Elizabeth's side. Storms and the tactical acumen of the English Navy shattered the Armada. Walsingham's intelligence system protected not only Mary Stuart, but also England. So there you have it, my son. Mary Stuart's end was one of the most tragic stories of the struggle for the throne. But remember, it was not only the death of a monarch, but the fate of an empire. Walsingham protected Elizabeth's throne with his wits and spies, but at a high price. Mary's blood has left an indelible mark on British history. And so, one of England's greatest espionage operations ended in triumph. Ah, my son, great kingdoms are defended not only with the sword, but also with intelligence and knowledge. Armies clash on battlefields, but the real victories are won in the shadows. And England's protector from the darkest shadows was Francis Walsingham. Under his leadership, Britain built one of the most sophisticated intelligence networks in Europe. Knowing what the enemy would do before he raised his sword was the greatest strength. So what kind of a game was played in these shadows? Come, I'll tell you. In 16th century Europe, games of thrones were played not only in royal palaces, but also in dark alleys, inn rooms, and embassy corridors. Walsingham wanted to anticipate not only dangers within England, but also threats across the continent. To this end, he placed agents in France, Spain, and even at the papal court. Although France was at times friendly with Elizabeth, powerful Catholic nobles were hostile to England. The House of Guise, in particular, was one of the major forces seeking to overthrow Elizabeth's Protestant rule. Walsingham kept a close eye on the plans of this dynasty, using English merchants trading in France, embassy staff, and even spies infiltrated into the French court. He also made secret agreements with King Henri III of France to prevent a direct attack on England. Spain was the biggest threat. King Felipe II wanted not only to avenge Mary Stuart's death, but also to wipe Protestant England off the map as the leader of the Catholic world. Walsingham sent numerous agents to infiltrate the Spanish court and army. British agents in Madrid reported to London on Spanish naval movements, diplomatic negotiations, and even the private correspondence of the royals. Britain was able to learn about Spain's intentions before war was declared. Walsingham was not content with merely gathering information. He wanted to further consolidate Elizabeth's throne by pitting the Catholic powers of Europe against each other. Divide and rule had been a tactic used by the most powerful empires throughout history, and England had to do it too. France and Spain, although both adhering to the Catholic faith, were rivals, both vying to become the greatest powers in Europe. Walsingham skillfully used his spies and diplomats to increase tensions between the two countries. When King Felipe II of Spain planned to attack England, he knew that France would also pose a threat. Walsingham's agents spread false or distorted information to the Catholic nobility in France and some groups in Spain, making them distrust each other. Even the papacy was a pawn in this game. Walsingham's informers inside the Vatican learned in advance of the Pope's decisions against England. If a crusade or an excommunication order was on the agenda, Elizabeth and her advisors were prepared for it. In some cases, forged letters were even prepared to create misunderstandings between the Pope and Spain. A kingdom was defended not only with the sword, but with the mind. The Queen was a heretic to Catholic Europe, and her death would mean the end of Protestant England. Walsingham had to prevent not only large-scale plots, but also individual assassination attempts, and for that he knew he could trust no one. Even Elizabeth's closest servants were regularly monitored. Everyone at court, from the kitchen staff to the ambassadors, was seen as a potential threat. When foreign ambassadors arrived in London, Walsingham's agents would secretly follow them and take notes of their conversations. Sometimes assassins were caught in the act, others disappeared. Sometimes that person was having a last conversation with Walsingham's men in the Tower of London. The Babington plot was one of the best-known assassination attempts, but there were many smaller plots like it. Walsingham's code breakers intercepted and decoded the correspondence of Spanish diplomats and predicted threats against the Queen. When agents carrying secret messages were caught, some were turned into double spies for Britain. So when the enemy sent orders to attack England, they were already in Elizabeth's hands. And don't forget, son, Walsingham's intelligence network was so extensive that sometimes an assassin sipping a drink in an inn room would never guess that the waiter serving him might also be a spy. Sometimes the messenger carrying a letter would not realize that the message in his pocket had already been copied. And most importantly, sometimes the secrets that a monarch would whisper would already be on their way to London. Now that's it, son. The spy wars in Europe were not just armies clashing. There was a silent war being waged in the shadows, and its greatest general was Francis Walsingham. Her intelligence kept Elizabeth alive, and thanks to him, England has remained safe for centuries, even in the shadows. But remember, the story doesn't end here. There were always new threats to Britain, and the intelligence network Walsingham had built was preparing for even bigger storms. Kit, history isn't just written on battlefields. Sometimes fate is decided in the salty winds of the sea long before the storm even hits. And in 1588, England's fate wasn't shaped by ships crashing against massive waves, but by a shadow war fought years earlier, a war of espionage. This wasn't just a battle between two great kingdoms, this was a fight for Protestant England's survival. And the most powerful weapon in this war wasn't gunpowder or swords, it was intelligence. Do you know how England defeated King Philip II's massive fleet? Well, sit tight and I'll tell you the story. King Philip II of Spain was the most powerful ruler of the Catholic world. His empire stretched from southern Europe all the way to the Americas. But there was one thing missing: England. To him, England was a nest of heretics. Queen Elizabeth's Protestant reforms were a direct challenge to Catholic power, and Philip couldn't let that slide. But religion wasn't the only issue. England was also an economic and military rival. Spanish gold from the Americas was constantly being raided by English pirates. Captains like Francis Drake struck fear into Spanish ships. Philip had had enough. He was determined to overthrow the little island queen and bring England back to Catholicism. So he ordered the creation of one of the greatest naval fleets in history, the Spanish Armada. Hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, powerful cannons. Philip's plan was simple. The Armada would set sail from Spain, join forces with Catholic troops in the Netherlands, then cross the English Channel and invade England. He was convinced that England wouldn't stand a chance. But there was one thing he didn't count on: Francis Walsingham. Walsingham was England's eyes and ears. He knew about Spain's massive operation long before it began. But how? This is where the art of espionage comes in. Walsingham's spies had infiltrated the Spanish court in Madrid and Lisbon. English intelligence intercepted letters from Spanish ambassadors and merchants revealing Philip's plans months in advance. Some reports even suggest that scribes working inside the Spanish palace were secretly passing information to England. Philip's most guarded orders were as good as an open book to Walsingham. In fact, England knew that even Spain wasn't fully ready for war. But knowing wasn't enough. Walsingham wanted proof, so he sent orders to his agents in the Netherlands. At the time, the Dutch were rebelling against Spanish rule, and England was supporting the Protestant resistance. English spies in the Netherlands kept a close watch on Spanish naval movements, constantly sending reports back to London. Thanks to them, England knew exactly where the Armada was docked, when it would set sail, and even how many ships were in the fleet. Walsingham didn't just gather intelligence, he actively sabotaged Philip's plans. English agents carried out attacks on Spanish shipyards. Some ships were burned before they could even be built. Supplies were poisoned. Rumors spread among Spanish sailors, creating fear and distrust before they even left port. By the time the Armada set sail for England, it was already weakened from within. In 1588, the Spanish Armada finally made its move. The fleet thundered across the sea, banners flying high, but England was ready. Francis Drake and the English captains had already identified the Armada's weaknesses. Thanks to Walsingham, the English fleet had a battle plan in place long before the fight even began. The English strategy was simple: trap the slow, bulky Spanish ships in tight spots and wear them down with faster, more maneuverable vessels. Then they unleashed fire ships in the dead of night, setting the Spanish fleet into chaos. Walsingham's intelligence reports gave the English an edge. They knew exactly where the enemy would be and planned their attacks accordingly. And then, nature itself sided with England. When the Spanish tried to retreat, violent storms in the North Sea shattered their remaining fleet. The surviving Spanish ships limped home, battered, starving, and riddled with disease. Philip's invincible armada never even reached English shores. While Elizabeth celebrated victory, Walsingham remained in the shadows, just as he always had. He wasn't a man who fought on battlefields. He fought in whispers, in letters, in secret messages. The Spanish Armada may have been one of the greatest naval invasions in history, but the real battle had been won before those ships even set sail. Walsingham had known every move Spain would make, and because of him, England didn't just win a war, it secured its very survival. From that moment on, England rose as the dominant naval power of Europe. Spain weakened, the Catholic world took a hit, and England stepped into a new era. But Walsingham? He never saw himself as a hero. He had simply done his job. But we remember, his legacy lives on. Even today, his methods are studied in the world of espionage. And England still remembers the wars fought in the shadows. So, kid, history isn't written by the victors. It's written by those who see the future before it happens. And Walsingham? He was one of history's greatest ghostwriters. Kid, you can't keep a powerful state standing just by having good laws and strong leaders. Some things aren't done in the daylight. They happen in the shadows. Some victories aren't won with swords, but with whispers. And sometimes, to ensure a nation's survival, you have to step into the darkest corners of those shadows. That's exactly what Sir Francis Walsingham did. He was Queen Elizabeth's hidden hand, a warrior who walked in silence. But his methods? They were often ruthless, sometimes even pushing the limits of morality. For him, there was only one truth: England's security, and for that, any means were justified. Walsingham was a master of the art of espionage. To protect England from its enemies, he built a massive intelligence network. But this wasn't just a handful of palace insiders or embassy officials. No, his agents were everywhere, from beggars roaming the streets of London to sailors working in the ports, from spies disguised as monks in Catholic monasteries to servants in the homes of French and Spanish nobles. No one ever truly knew who was working for whom. His system was so well designed that even the servants working for foreign ambassadors were spies. Secrets whispered in the royal court would land on Walsingham's desk within hours. Protestant merchants kept an eye on Catholic diplomats in European ports. English soldiers in the Netherlands reported every move the Spanish troops made. Even in churches, Walsingham had eyes. Protestant spies attended Catholic masses, listening carefully to every word. But Walsingham wasn't just gathering intelligence, he was also manipulating it. He ran disinformation campaigns to mislead his enemies. His agents infiltrated Catholic conspiracies, feeding them false hopes just to expose their plans. Sometimes a spy would create a fake betrayal plot to make an enemy fall into his own trap. And sometimes conspiracies were crushed before they even began. But you need to understand something, kid. Information isn't always easy to get. Sometimes, learning the truth requires painful methods. And Walsingham, he knew this better than anyone. He didn't just rely on spies in the shadows. He also broke people to get what he wanted. In the dark dungeons of the Tower of London, the fate of royal conspirators was uncertain. Being taken there usually meant never coming back. Walsingham's interrogators used every method possible to get confessions. Thumbscrews, the rack that stretched limbs until bones snapped, and the scavenger's daughter, a device that slowly crushed the skull. All of these were used in the name of England's security. But Walsingham didn't always turn to torture. He believed the most valuable information wasn't taken by force, but through carefully crafted deception. Most conspirators didn't break just because they feared pain. Walsingham knew how to play their minds. Prisoners were shown fake letters proving their allies had betrayed them. They were promised freedom only to be tricked into believing their closest friends had sold them out. And at that moment, even the toughest men would surrender. So, was all this necessary? That's where history goes silent and conscience speaks, kid. Walsingham didn't hesitate to cross the line to protect Queen Elizabethan England. To him, morality came second to security. Any threat to the state had to be eliminated by any means necessary. Forgeries, executions without solid proof, surveillance on innocent people, These were all part of his system. Sometimes, even the innocent had to be sacrificed for the greater good. Take the Babington plot, for example. Some say the letters sent to Mary, Queen of Scots, had secret lines added by Walsingham himself. So, did Mary actually plan to kill Elizabeth, or did Walsingham set her up? Even today, historians don't know for sure. But here's something you need to understand, kid. Behind every powerful nation, there are always dirty secrets. Walsingham might not be remembered as a hero. Some see him as a savior, while others call him a tyrant. But history, it's never just one-sided. And sometimes, to protect a nation, you have to walk in the shadows. England survived because of the intelligence empire Walsingham built. His methods laid the foundation for modern espionage. But it leaves us with a question. How far is too far in the name of national security? What price should be paid to protect a leader? These questions didn't just haunt Walsingham. They're the same questions every ruler in history has had to face. Remember this, kid. Power isn't always in the light. Sometimes it hides in the darkest corners. And the ones who walk in those shadows, they're the ones who change the world. Kid, every great man's life is a peak. But after every peak, there's always a fall. For years, Francis Walsingham ruled England from the shadows. He uncovered plots, eliminated enemies, and protected the crown. He was one of Queen Elizabeth's most loyal servants. But power, it brings loneliness. And no matter how loyal you are, one day you disappear into the very shadows you once controlled. Walsingham was irreplaceable to Queen Elizabeth. His vast spy network protected her throne, prevented assassinations, and helped defeat the Spanish Armada. She relied on him, trusted him, but, kid, let me tell you something. Rulers never fully trust anyone, especially not a man full of secrets. Elizabeth admired Walsingham's intelligence, but was uneasy about his ruthless, paranoid methods. He would do whatever it took to protect England, even if that meant orchestrating assassinations to stop assassinations, or setting traps to prevent conspiracies. The Queen? She was careful. She knew that a man who thrived in the shadows could one day become a threat to her too. So while she appreciated his service, she never let him get too close. Walsingham handled England's darkest business, but Elizabeth kept her distance. Because a ruler must always fear the power of their advisors. And Walsingham, even in the shadows, he had gained too much power. But power, kid, can be a man's greatest burden. Walsingham gave everything to serve his queen, but in the end, his service left him broke and alone. Maintaining England's intelligence network was expensive. Spies, informants, code breakers, bribes, it all required money, and the state wasn't always generous. More often than not, Walsingham paid for it out of his own pocket, and it drained him. Despite being one of the most powerful men in England, he was on the brink of financial ruin. But that was just one part of his downfall. The real losses, they were personal. He sacrificed the people he loved for this shadow war. His daughter Frances was widowed at a young age. His friends and allies, either assassinated or lost in power struggles. In his world, friendship was a luxury. Because a man who lives in secrets, he rarely has real friends. And then came the year 1590. Walsingham was tired. He had spent years protecting England from the dark, defeating enemies before they could strike. But no man, no matter how smart, can defeat time. Illness was wearing him down. His debts and personal losses had drained him. He was no longer as influential in the royal court. Even Elizabeth wasn't the same. A new generation of statesmen was taking over. In his final days, he lived quietly in his London home. And kid, let me tell you something. Brilliant minds often die the loneliest deaths. There was no grand ceremony when he passed. The man who had saved England from ruin died in debt and without recognition. His funeral was simple, almost forgettable. But the system he built, that lasted. For decades after his death, England's intelligence network continued to shape history. Even today, modern spy agencies still use the methods he created. Coded messages, informant networks, forged documents, disinformation campaigns. That was his legacy. He proved that wars aren't just won with swords, but with intelligence. And kid, a man's life isn't measured by the years he lived, but by what he left behind. Walsingham's name, maybe it wasn't written in golden letters and royal records, but in the shadows, he shaped some of the most critical moments in history. And remember this, true power isn't always in the spotlight. Sometimes it's hidden in the darkest corners. Now, are you ready for the next story? Because, kid, there are still so many secrets left to tell. Kid, everything you hear has roots that go deep into history. The knowledge you hold today was shaped by a brilliant mind from the past. Francis Walsingham wasn't just Queen Elizabeth's loyal servant. He went down in history as the mind that helped build England's future. He laid the foundations for a power built on secrecy, far beyond the wars and throne struggles. And remember, those foundations still stand today, deep in places you can't even reach. A person's power isn't just measured by their army, but by their ability to know what their enemies are thinking, kid. Walsingham mastered that. He didn't just create a spy network for England's state security, he created a system. He was a figure fighting in the shadows, and with that he laid down the very building blocks of the world's most advanced intelligence agencies today. Back then, Queen Elizabeth's throne was critical not just for England, but for all of Europe. Walsingham always stayed one step ahead in a time when powerful enemies like the French and Spanish were threatening England. Intelligence isn't just about gathering information, it's about analyzing it the right way. And he had the power to process and direct that information. The network Walsingham built laid the foundations for the intelligence agencies we know today. Spies, informants, secret letters, and coded messages, those were his everyday tools. But more importantly, he turned secrecy, security, and information management into an art. His methods weren't just about meeting the needs of the time. They were built with a long-term vision for the future. Today, the world's most powerful intelligence agencies like MI6 and MI5 often operate in secrecy and information warfare. But you need to know this, kid. These agencies were shaped by Walsingham's system. He revolutionized the field. Spy methods often change and evolve, but the core logic, the fundamental principles remain the same. Walsingham's principles are still considered the bedrock of state security, even hundreds of years later. Many analysts and researchers who've studied Walsingham's intelligence networks have noticed something. His approach wasn't just about gathering information, it was about using it as efficiently as possible. While MI6 represents a modern example of British intelligence, it still follows the path Walsingham laid out. He basically wrote the spirit of today's intelligence system. MI5, tasked with maintaining internal security, also follows in Walsingham's footsteps. The identity of secret agents, the security of coded messages, and how to keep an eye on internal threats. All of these things are shaped at the intersection of past and present through Walsingham's legacy. His methods are still used today because he knew one important thing. True power lies in controlling and managing information. Kid, the state's security isn't just about the strength of its army. True security comes from the information needed to keep order within that state. Walsingham built a system to provide Queen Elizabeth with exactly the information she needed. And that system left a legacy that didn't just affect England back then, but has impacted generations that followed. The Elizabethan era was a time when England was culturally and politically rising, but behind the scenes, it was Walsingham's intelligence network that made sure this rise was protected. Over time, this network evolved, helping shape the intelligence agencies of the world's most powerful states today. Walsingham's legacy wasn't just about one man's victory. He turned the foundations of the state into a solid structure for the future. He didn't just use espionage and intelligence services for personal gain. He used them to ensure the survival of a nation. And this approach turned into a tradition. that has kept surviving, adapting, and gaining strength over the years. Kid, every great man leaves a legacy behind. Walsingham's legacy only grew stronger over time. He didn't just leave his mark in his own era, he left a mark in history. Today, every intelligence agency, every secret agent takes something from his methods. But remember this, every power, every victory comes at a cost. Walsingham shaped a nation's fate from the shadows. And when you look back, maybe he was the one who left the deepest mark in those shadows. Now, kid, our journey together has come to an end, but don't forget this. In the depths of the past, there are always more secrets. This journey is just the beginning. Goodbye.